So hello everyone. Today we're going to be talking about making time for making art. But first, let's get into what I've been up to for the last several weeks on the project I've been talking about a lot on my YouTube channel here. I've been calling it my big grant funded project. I received a grant last year to create a musical score and short film about a important NASA space mission, and that project is coming along nicely. I had to give a really big push though to get the written score done, and you can kind of see a little bit on the computer here. I'm using a piece of software called MuseScore. It's kind of like a word processor but with musical notation, and it's the first time I have ever used a computer program to put notes on a page. In the past, I've always done this by hand, and because this project involves a lot of other musicians, I didn't want to make anybody else read my terrible handwriting. So I'm using this software for the first time. It has had some ups and downs and some things that I've gotten used to, but the score is finally done. There's the full score version, and then there's partial scores that I can pull out of that. And all of my singers are happy so far that they can read the notes clearly, and it's all very, very, very nice. So the subject for today: making time to make art. In my case, compose music. Well, like most of us out there trying to do something on our own, we still have one of those, what they call a regular job. And that means our passion pursuit, in my case, composing music. You might be a comedian, you might be a writer or a singer or something. It has to be done kind of as a side hustle. And I use that word side hustle purposely because I think above all, in everything that we pursue, we really have to take a professional attitude about it. Even if we're not making money yet, we really need to have that professional attitude towards pursuing our dreams and our passions. Otherwise, they're just going to kind of sit there and not really do anything. And so, this is kind of why. My particular regular job that pays the bills is in the organ industry, so I'm part of the music business already, and that's a very fortunate thing for me. I do a variety of tasks, and there are some periods of time where it is more than a full-time job. If I have a big installation going on and I gotta do wiring and hang speakers and do all of the things that go into installing a new organ into a big space like a church, that might take up a week or two of my time working 8, 10, 12-hour days. On other occasions, I might have a repair job here and there. Most days I'm on the phone for a certain amount of time trying to drum up business and chat with clients and make sure everything's going okay for people. It's a very flexible job. It's in the music business, and I like it just the way it is. It's got enough work for me to keep the bills paid, and I'm doing something that I still like to do. So I'm very lucky in that regard. Some of you out there probably have a 9 to 5, and that might be a little less flexible, might make it a little more uncomfortable to try and find time to make art. But I'm going to tell you the things that I do to try and make that time, and maybe that'll help you out a little bit, even on a regular 9 to 5 job. So I think one of the key things is, again, working from that idea that we need to take a professional attitude toward this. Get organized. Now, for this particular project, the very first task was to make sure I could have all of the people and the recording studio and everything lined up to get everything done. But then I had to knuckle down and get the music on paper, because it wasn't going to do me any good to have something in my head or something that I've just plunked out on the keyboard into some recording software and said, hey, that's my music. No, other people, other professional musicians have to be able to read this thing, and so I had to do that. And so for me, getting organized really means set up those tasks. And so in this project, I have a list of priorities, things that I have to get done before I move on to the next thing. And I try to hold myself to that as much as I possibly can. For the last, really the whole holiday season, I really pushed to get the written score done and out to everybody so that they can prepare for recording sessions in March. And that was the big organizing task that I had to do. Also, organizing has to do with how I set up my workspace. And I like to keep my setup clean. Now, what do I mean by that? Because you might be looking at my space and saying, well, that's not all that clean, buddy. But what I mean by that is having what I need for that task at that moment in time. Now, this right now is set up for recording. I have some recording to do, and I'll talk a little more about that in a minute. But when I was putting notes on the paper, I had a different setup here. This keyboard was over somewhere else. I was using a different keyboard for the note writing process, and that made it so that when I come in here to work, I have what I need for that task. That's all that's here. And so that kind of helps me to keep focused on that task at that moment and get that done before I move to anything else. Score's now done. Now I can move on to finishing up the recording. On this project, all of the instrumental parts, the organ and piano stuff that I'm composing is going to be recorded here. We're going to take that over to Maximus Media, and then that's where we're going to add the singers. I'm not set up in here to record the singers, but Maximus is, and that's one of the advantages of having the funding to be able to do this. And another little key element is to set deadlines. Again, in keeping with that, maintain a professional attitude. In this case, because it's funded by a grant, I have an absolute deadline that I must meet. But we, the team, have set a even tighter deadline just to hold our own feet to the fire. Our plan is to have this all done by the end of April. If things don't hit that, we've still got 2 months to be able to tidy up whatever went wrong or got messed up along the way. But at any rate, deadlines. And so for myself, even if I'm doing something that doesn't have an outside deadline coming in on it, I try to set a deadline for myself. That, again, holds my feet to the fire. Then I can go through that whole thing of, okay, I've got to organize this thing I want to do, this maybe it's an album I want to create, maybe it's a suite of music, whatever it may be. Line out, on my notebook, what are the things I'm going to need to get done? What's the most logical order in which to get those done, so that when I have those few hours here and there that I can work on something, I can get in and do that. A little over a year ago, I read a book by Steven Pressfield called The War of Art. And currently, I'm rereading it. Now, if you read that book and maybe you didn't like it, I would really suggest read it again. You might get some new insights out of it. Pressfield is all about taking that professional attitude in everything we do. He also makes the larger point that when it comes to creating work, it's not the inspiration or the drive or anything like that that's really hard about creating the work. It's actually finding the time and making sure you make the time to sit down and do the work, whether you feel like it or not. And he calls all of those little things we do to procrastinate and keep from doing that, he refers to that as resistance to creating our art. And the big pieces of resistance that have always functioned in my life, which have led me to being in my 60s and for the first time really taking my composer hat seriously, it's all the little excuses I've made over the years. And kind of number one on that list, I'm too tired. You know, the day job I have right now is, like I said, fairly flexible, but that hasn't been the case in the past. Before, I was a music director in a great big church, and I had a lot of music to write, I had a lot of scores to arrange, I had all kinds of duties, and it was really, really easy at the end of the day to just say, I'm too tired, I'm just too tired, I'll have to rearrange my life. Well, and of course, that's never going to happen if we really think about it. If you're not willing to make the time, you're not going to magically find the time. Now, the other one that really held me back for a long time, and maybe this is a factor in your life if you're a creative person, I'm not ready, or the other version of that is I'm not good enough. Well, again, if you're not able to find that drive and that time to get the skills you need, then they're not going to magically appear. And for me, getting around that little silly excuse, I'm not ready, I'm not good enough, was to make sure that I really focus hard on maintaining and building my skills as a player. That way, I don't have an excuse. And there's all kinds of other things that I've thought through here. You know, what if I compose something I can't play? The skill level that I'm indicating on the score is more than my 61-year-old fingers will do. Well, then I either have to step up and work on my skills, or get somebody else to play it. I'm the composer. I don't have to play every note that I write. Just like, you know, you might need help in editing your book or anything like that. You know, we don't need to be everything to everybody. So all of that kind of throws that I'm not ready, I'm not good enough thing right on out the window. We don't need to worry about that one. Now this one, I say this one a lot. My wife usually catches me on it and you know, tells me it's nonsense, because it is. No one cares. Now that statement by itself is actually kind of true, right? Nobody is thinking about, gee, I wonder what Tony's working on right now. What kind of music is he writing? No, nobody cares. The one that goes with that is, of course, nobody will like it. And about 10 years ago, I got to learn the ultimate lesson on that little piece of resistance, that excuse that I made for so many years. I poured 2 years of my life into a particular show. This was a storytelling show. I was going to play some music as part of it, but mostly it was me telling some stories about my life. And from the moment I walked on stage and spilled out the first line of the show, I could tell by the vibe I was getting off the audience that it was terrible. It was going to be a flop. And I had 4 shows booked, so at that moment I had 4 more hours of doing this thing that nobody was going to like. It's the only show I've ever done where a few people actually got up and left the room. Well, here's the thing. I survived that. It didn't destroy my reputation. Nobody comes up and constantly reminds me about that terrible show I did back in 2013. Nobody cares. Nobody liked it and they've forgotten about it. And the silver lining on that cloud was that while I was doing that show, I realized some things about myself in doing that kind of show, and it completely changed the direction that I would take for doing that kind of a storytelling show. And out of that came probably my best show of that genre of storytelling with music. It was originally called Play It Like Virgil, and eventually it would be called Bach and Roll, The Unconventional Life of Virgil Fox. And in that form, made as a movie because it was the pandemic, it played at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival and got a 4-star review. So we can't sit around worrying about nobody cares, nobody's going to like it, because at the end of the day, that doesn't matter. If we do a bad show, if we write a bad piece, if we write a bad book, that's that little piece, that little nugget of experience that we need. You see, the other way to think about this is I was good enough to write a flop. And that's something not everybody can say, because most people are not going to get up on that stage and do a show of any kind. So we can't, as creative people, sit around beating ourselves up, worried about, is this going to be a success? Is it going to be a failure? Is anybody going to like it? Pour your soul into what you're doing and let the chips fall where they may. Those are my thoughts on making time for making your art, and some of it's about finding the mental strength to make your art. And above all, get in there and do it. Sit down every day, good, bad, or otherwise. Write your stories, write your songs, whatever it may be. Do it every day. Thanks a lot. We'll see you next time.